This is Labors, and it is so nice to have you here. These are the paints you need. Okay, we're back to it. Start removing the mold lines with the dull part of your blade like it's Granny's dried up skin on her heel. The situation isn't that bad on the mold line part. We only have the usual suspects over the side of the arms and legs. After that, I use a black primer with the airbrush, but we both know you're going to use a can primer, so I don't even bother putting up some priming footage here. And yes guys, if you have an airbrush primer but don't have an airbrush, you can still use this as a primer. You just have to apply it by... Who would have thought? A regular brush. Although it would be much faster if you would have an airbrush, but this is a very good alternative, and you don't have to buy like 5 of these each year. Guys, if you don't see Papa Labor's video in like months, be sure that the can primer mafia had enough and got rid of Papa Labor's, okay? So search for me. Cover the skin with Steel Legion Trap. This time I won't do the zenithal highlight approach, because if we skip one step, then we made the process even faster, right? And if we don't have a light undercoat, we can't really use contrast paints, can we? Well, technically you can, but please don't use contrast paints over black primers, because Papa Labor's is going to lose it. Don't worry about the details right now, just slap on the paint as fast as you can. If you got some paint on the shirt or any other area that is not the skin, it doesn't matter for now, okay? Don't try to be precise, because you will waste precious minutes trying to be as neat as possible. We will do a checkup round, and Papa Labor's will tell you when to fix all these mistakes, okay? Just remember to do as Papa Labor's told you so, and you will be happy as a peach. Now, our top priority is to have nice and opaque layers, so give it 2 layers to make absolutely sure that your layers are opaque. Guys, if your layers are not going to be as opaque as Granny's Grey Cataract, I'm going to slap on your tiny hand. Continue the process with Hull Red. I cover every leather parts like the scabbards, straps, and almost completely one of the runner variants clothes, because I checked the spawn cards for them and one of them is rocking a black and blue combo, while the other has a more warmer brown attire. The brutes have different clothes as well, so we will cover those variants too. If I were painting this for myself and not for a client, I would paint all these brutes and runners all the same, because you have to paint like 89 of these guys, and bringing more variety and colors to your schemes is going to slow down the process pretty much. So if you want to bust out these guys out super fast, then just use one variant that is a little bit more different than the walkers, so you don't confuse the walkers with the runners. On the brutes, I aim for the leather parts as well, but I cover all the boots with Hull Red. As I said before, these minis have way too much detail on them, with all the fur, robes, leather armor, straps, pouches. It's kinda ridiculous from a painting aspect, especially for some rank and file minis. On the blue variant on the runner, I use Macrake blue over his teared up shirt and lower robes. This is a bit more saturated value than the one on the spawn card, but we will desaturate it a little bit later. The brutes has a black and green variant. On the green, I use Deathworld Forest to cover all the robes he is wearing, and on the black, I just did some tidy up on the black parts. Now for all the furry bindings over their robes and armor, we are going to use Baneblade Brown like we did for the walkers. 2 layers again to get a nice and even coverage. You may have noticed that my brush kinda looks awful. I'm using this old brush on purpose, because I'm just slapping the paint on like I would slap on your tiny hand, and the texture of these bindings are gonna grind away your brush's tip like Granny grinds her teeth while she sleeps. Not because she doesn't have any teeth. But try to use a brush that you don't really care for, because you will be very sad when your expensive kolinsky brushes have a ruined tip after base coating a couple of these guys, and you will cry. It's also a nice skill to develop, to be precise with a dull brush. Not the most useful skill, I might say, but it's definitely going to save you some money in the long run. Maybe you can save up enough money to buy an airbrush, right? Let's cover the inside of the mouth with burnt red. On the fatties you can see the details of the tongue, which we can work with, so it would be a shame to leave it black. If the inside of the mouth would have been smaller, I would leave it black because it could create a very vibrant contrast if you leave it black but you pick out the teeth with an off-white. It's a kind of foreshadowing sentence, by the way. After that, I'm doing a tidy up round because all that is left is the metallics before we give a wash to the minis. I look for mistakes like Granny Labors looks for her glasses in the middle of the night, but I like to believe I have more success with this fixing round because she's technically blind, so examine different parts and try to force your eyes to stay for one section a little bit. It's very easy to look at all the minis fast and be done with it, but nothing is going to increase your time painting this than constantly going back and forth because you found a new mistake and you try to fix it. It's always better to have a nice and clean paint job than to have something messy and rushed, even if it's a speed paint. When we try to paint fast, it doesn't mean we don't care about the tidiness of our work. Not only that, but I will slap on your tiny hand if I see your messy painted runners and brutes. Cover the metallic parts with gunmetal on the steel parts and use Brush Scorpion for the gold. I use a different brush and water pot so the little metallic flakes won't ruin the brush that you use for regular acrylics, which doesn't make too much sense since we used the crappy brush in the first place, but for good measure, use a different brush and a water pot. On the runners, you have the gold parts on the scabbards and the binding on the quiver. On the brutes, I'm pretty sure you only have steel parts on their helmet and the green fatty has some sections over the chest and belly. By the way, have you guys noticed that only the last couple iterations of the game called these brutes, and before that they were fatties. I guess the fatties cried over TikTok that term was too derogatory for them, but nonetheless, these are fatties. Remember guys, bullying is back, and I'm here for it. It's time for our first wash of Xereus Purple. Just like in the Walkers video, I'm diluting the paint with some contrast medium and some water so it will have a nice flow. I give each mini a heavy wash, but I also remove most of it using my brush. If I would let this much wash dry on the mini, it would create huge splotchy spots, which are very unpleasant to look at, like Granny's bald spots. So have a paper towel nearby and remove the paint with your brush, then remove most of that paint on a paper towel and go back and forth until the paint is mostly pulled up in the crevices. This purple will help us give us some depth to the shadow areas and creates an integrated look with the walkers, so all the minis will feel like they belong in the same environment. I do this relatively fast and you need to speed up things because if the wash starts to dry and you are still fiddling around with it with your brush, you will create some horrendous texture. Other than that, you can't really make mistakes here, so don't be afraid to speed up your process intentionally. Just look at the large pools and remove them before they start to dry. Once the purple wash dried, we will add some Null Oil to the metallic parts. This will move the shiny metallics to a more dirty finish, which is fitting for these zombies. We will have shiny armors for the guards, but for these zombies, it's not necessary. I apply this over the blue skirt over the runner variant and over the scabbards as well. The surface tension will hold the wash to a certain amount, so don't use too much if you don't want this to spill over to other areas. Now let's paint the eyes and teeth with ice yellow. Use a base layer consistency and shape your brush's tip to be pointy as Granny's nipple. Remove the excess paint on your hand or a paper towel. When I'm painting eyes, I usually remove the excess on my hand and not on a paper towel because my hand absorbs less moisture than the paper towel, so I have more time to work with the paint. When painting eyes, it's very important that you have enough time to get the paint on those little eyeballs without the tip drying, so you don't have to force the bristles to leave some paint on the eyes, but it should flow from the brush with ease and cover well if you have the right consistency. I also paint the teeth of each zombie, leaving a tiny bit of richer shadow between each tooth for more definition. If you are happy with how these look, then great, you'll be done with these minis spending like 10 minutes each, and they are ready for the table. However, if you want to make them look a little bit nicer, we will spend around another 10 minutes on each of them, but there is no pressure. If these normie blend guys you want to play with, it's completely fine, don't watch the rest of the video, but if you choose to watch the rest of the video, there is a slight chance that you can win a red Lamborghini, you guys. If the wash is dried, we will highlight the minis starting with the skin, mixing some necrotic flesh to the Steel Legion drab. We want to make the skin nice and pale, and to be honest, this is going to be even faster and a little bit better looking option for the skin than what we did for the walkers in my opinion. So pick out the jawline, nose ridge, brow ridge, cheeks and the limbs where the light would catch the highlight areas. Use a thin layer consistency to build up the layers, and you only need like 2 or 3 passes at max to create these very nice transitions, layering the highlights on top of each other, reducing their size with each layer. Once you have the major volumes, you can use a thinner consistency to blend in the colors more nicely, but don't take too much time with it. We don't need perfect blends, but the values we are using are just right, so the gradients should be easily achievable, okay? You need to be somewhat patient for this, and Papa Labors know that it's very hard to slow down on a process where you want the process to be fast and be done with all these minutes. Just like with your divorce, it will have a longer procedure and we need to accept that. Take a deep breath, take a break and get back to it. There are 2 types of people in this world. The ones who hate batch painting and the ones who hate batch painting and still do it. Everyone loves the hordes of painted minis, but nobody wants to put in the work. I mean, really, the only people who get excited about painting a whole box of Zombicide are mostly the ones that have never painted a whole box before, because after your 3rd row of zombies you're going to wonder like, is it worth it? What am I doing? Is this going to take months? Is this why my wife left me and I can't see my children? And the dread and despair kicks in, and most of you will give up, but there will be a few who don't, because they probably have a certain personality disorder. But those will be super proud of themselves, and once you've done it, you learn about yourself that you can probably do it again. And families are overrated, you guys. So keep at it, boys, and 2% women who watch my videos, believe Papa Labors when he says it's worth it. Like, are you a sissy quitter who gives up when it gets hard, or are you a speed painting freak who devours grey plastic and spits out nicely painted miniatures like it's nothing? Let's reduce the highlight areas with necrotic flesh. That's right, the same paint we used for the walkers as well. So all the zombies going to have a very similar coral scheme, like the walkers, so we can tell that they belong to the same army. Same thin layer consistency again, and I'm pretty sure most of you doesn't need to blend this other than layering inside the previous highlight layer. You can pick out the knuckles and the same areas on the face we highlighted before, just covering less and less with each layer to keep the contrast between the values and to have a nice and smooth gradients like Granny's butt cheek. When you highlight the face, make sure you have a darker area around the eye sockets, so the eyes can stand out a little bit more rather than blending them with the highlight areas. Pick out the double chins of the fatties and add a little bit more volume to the runners, upper chest and shoulders. There you can emphasize the muscles to add more detail to them. After that, I highlight the fur parts. Now, I remember on the walkers I used the Baneblade Brown and Ice Yellow. However, I ran out of Baneblade Brown, so I'm using this mix as a replacement, but if you have some Baneblade Brown, just mix that with some Ice Yellow. Pick out the main planes of light over the fur areas and just break up the coverage next to those to have a fast and easy gradient. This way we can emphasize the texture of the fur collars and the bindings, so it's very important to leave some of the recess areas in the process. Most of the time I'm just overbrushing the paint over the furry texture. This means I use a thicker consistency and just hitting the parts mostly with the side of the brush. This way the paint will less likely hit the crevices. I do that and use some thin layers over the crevices, as well when I apply a second layer of highlights, so the recess areas that face completely towards the sky will feel more organic. Then I had to do the brown parts of the minis with Tasgor fur to build up those warmer brown highlights. One of the runners has his full attire brown, so I highlight his shirt with some thin layers and use the same overbrushing technique to highlight his studded leather cap. On the fatties, I give some texture to the leather armor parts with some thin lines over their surface. I do that on their shoulder guards and straps on the chest. I also highlight the sacks and pouches over their belt with thin layers. After that, I give a round of light dry brush over the brown sections. I remove most of the paint from the dry brush on a paper towel so I can accent the parts that stand out more on the mini. Since there is very little paint between the bristles, I less likely hit the parts that I already highlighted, but you can always try it out on the edge of the base or your nails if you have the right amount and consistency with your dry brush. Before you dip your dry brush into paint, dip into a little bit of water and wipe off your dry brush on a paper towel so you can wash your dry brush more easily later and extend the lifetime of your bristles. Highlight the black hair and goatees on the brutes with black and French Mirage blue or any other grey you have. I cover around 50% of their surface to keep the mid-tone to black. One of the runners should have some sort of facial hair, but I couldn't really see it to be honest, so I only did that for the fatties. I also used that value to highlight the black clothes on that variant of the fatties, while I used Desert Forest and a mix of Oruk Flesh for the green ones. I place these highlights over the edge of the folds and usually on the folds itself that are facing up. As I said before, the fastest way to cut corners, because you have to paint like 126 of these guys, if you don't hassle with the different variants and paint everything to one's color scheme. But this is how they appear on the box, and I know that my client prefers the box art in the paint job. If I would paint this for myself, all the zombies would have the same clothes because it's way faster to finish them that way. Reduce the highlight areas on the black parts with French Mirage Blue and use Oruk Flesh on its own on the green variants. I think the green one looks better because something with more color will always look better when we put it next to some very desaturated schemes like the black clothes of the other fatty. But if you choose to paint the other one blue or red, it would stand out a little bit more on the table. I would only suggest to use a little bit less saturated hues because these are some undead soldiers. It's a nice metaphor to use desaturated tones for their color scheme and have more saturated ones for the heroes. This way the heroes will stand out more in the crowd of greys, and we can have as the saturation as the symbol of life to be represented. This is the scheme I'm following with my Marvel Zombies painting guides as well. However, more saturated colors will always be more pleasant to look at if you don't overdo it with some crazy color schemes. After that, I highlight the runner variants with Thunderhawk blue on the blue parts. While this time you might wonder that, oh yeah, speed painting, am I right? With all this highlighting and nonsense. Guys, take it in consideration that the time it took me to place these highlights was like a minute. We don't have large surfaces to work with, and every highlight we add will require less and less time than the previous one, since the area that we work with are getting smaller and smaller. Yet it will push the visual interest a lot. Then we highlight the blue parts and the brown parts of the other variant, mixing some ice yellow to our midtones. And you guessed it, we cover a little bit less with thin layers, and that's about it for the highlights. All that is left is to paint the eyes green and the base of the minis. I uploaded a basing video on my Patreon page, so you can check that out if you want to have an easy yet good looking base that fits the wintry theme of White Death. Lastly, I glazed some fluorescent green over the eyeballs and eye sockets to create a glow effect around the eyes. 7 to 8 layers to do the trick, and I wait between each layer to dry. With that, the runners and brutes are ready for the table. Thanks for watching, and if you are interested in more Zombicide White Death content, consider joining my Patreon page like these lovely people. You can find tons of PDF and video guides for other board games as well that you might already have, or if you need a little bit of extra help, you can book private lessons with Papala boards. Special shoutout goes to Cold-Blooded Dom, Trying to Paint Minis, Jonathan Mausner, Glitchy McCrash, Penoman45, Earthapple21, Michael Kerr, Remlo, Simon Stefan, and Courtney Hassel. I hope your day will be as smooth as a granny's butt cheek.